Evolutionary.org Hardcore episode 233 is coming your way. Today's going to be a really, really good podcast. And this podcast could change your physique beyond anything that you could have ever imagined. And today we're going to talk about the best cutting stack with Trenbolone by Para Pharma. So we're going to go over, Mobster and I, we're going to go over, is Tren good for cutting? We're going to talk about which ester you should pick, Tren options from Para Pharma, diet training, side effects to watch for, and why Para Pharma is so good. First, a reminder, everyone, we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. Smash the like button, subscribe, leave comments, and that will help the algorithms pick up the podcast, help us grow, because we are trying to grow this organically. We're not a podcast that buys followers and buys views and buys likes like these other podcasts out there. We want to grow it the right way and the honest way, not the dishonest way. So that's what we're trying to do. I think 99%, I read something yesterday, 99% of these fitness podcasts that you see out there, they buy followers, they buy subscribers and all that shit. We don't do that on this podcast. So we're going to grow the right way. And this is a crowd sharing podcast. We bring in people that listen to the podcast to interview. We're the only podcast that does that. So let's get into it, Mobster. Is Tren good for cutting? And I'm going to ask you that. You've been around probably like 20 more years than I have. You've been around since like World War II. You're a veteran. So
well, my mum has. I don't know about me.
What's your take on?
I've been around since Vietnam, I think, somewhere there around. Yeah.
What's your trend for? What's your opinion on this one?
Well, the answer to this, in very simple terms, which will make for an incredibly short show, is yes. Does it work for cutting? Absolutely. And all joking aside, the advantage of me being around a long time, and for that matter, Steve having a great deal of experience, is let me rephrase this, because there was Mitch Hooper was doing a thing this morning saying, "Oh, we're not doctors. There's no data for this." Look, Mitch, this is simple, right? You and I have experience. Mitch has experience, and we have the availability of being able to go on the internet and not just search for stuff today, but going back decades, right? So you can look at the original reason why products were created. But what you can really do, what Mitch kind of avoided doing on the show that I watched this morning, was Mitch knows what works, because otherwise, why the fuck's he sticking certain drugs into his body? And he knows what it works, not just because he's going to work with a set of doctors right now for this upcoming event that he's involved in, but because he can look at thousands upon thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions going back decades of people that have used different steroids for different reasons. And he knows damn well what works for this and what works for that. And he knows that by talking to his buddies. He knows that because he can look this shit up. And the reality of the situation that between me and Steve, we've probably got in excess of 60 years experience between the two of us, maybe more, maybe even close to 70. And we have the advantage that we also talk to other veterans. I've talked to steroid gurus who are no longer alive 20 odd years ago. I have books on steroids that are older than I am. Steve and I have done the history of steroids. So we know it's almost a fucking given. And there will not be scientific data for the things that we want, purely and simply for moral and ethical reasons anyway. But we know we can go back and say, right, if we go back to fucking 1980, Steve, and there's a way of doing the historical searches on the various search engines, we can look at the way those steroids were being used then, and we can compare them to now. And we can say, I can touch the table, say, touch wood, it's pretty much a fucking guarantee that the experience of millions of users of steroids, and specifically hundreds of thousands, if not millions of users of Trenbolone, have been able to achieve certain levels with their physique, whether that's in strength or muscle or cutting. So the reality of the situation is thus. I would put fucking money on Tren being great for cutting. And I can do that because I can go and search for and find, just on our forum, Steve, just on Evolutionary, thousands of people that have used Tren. And out of that percentage, I would probably say 50 or 60% of those people have trained in such a way and dieted in such a way using Tren that they got leaner. That negates the argument. It's like saying, oh, it only does this or it only does that. The great thing about Tren, of course, Steve, as we know, it's also great for adding muscle tissue if it's used properly, and we're going to touch upon the whys and hows. and also great for strength. We know that just from reading what powerlifters have done and how they've used certain particular drugs. And we know that one of the drugs that they use is Trenbolone. But for today's purposes, for the show's purposes, is it a cut-in steroid? Yes. And what should we use with it for stack purposes, as per the topic title, to get the best results for a cut stack? So yeah, I'm going to say it is a fucking given. I don't think it's an argument one way or the other, Steve. What do you think?
And yeah, you bring up a good point. If you ever go to a bodybuilder show, you see the guys lined up on stage, it's chemical warfare. And one of the steroids that I guarantee you that they are using is Tren. Another one is going to be equipoise, especially guys who are doing physique competitions. Equipoise is very popular because equipoise is like using, it's a testosterone derivative without using testosterone. But Tren is a different animal. And Trenbolone is structured in a certain way to be very, very aggressive because the stuff works. Okay. It works. That's why they're using it. And it's designed to help you grow muscle and strength even while in a huge deficit, And it also helps you burn more body fat. So when you're on Tren, you'll notice during, if you get in a workout for the day and you don't eat enough carbs that day, you don't take in enough
Yeah.
calories, you'll feel, the hyponess because
Yeah.
your body, your muscles become so fucking like sponges and they just want to suck everything up that you're left
Mm.
with nothing. And you'll notice on this stuff, you'll know on a day where, yeah, I didn't eat enough today. You'll feel it at the end of the day. You'll wake up in the middle of the night in a pool of sweat. It's called
Yeah.
Tren sweats. And we're going to get into side effects later. You'll
Mm,
know it.
mm, mm.
And that's because Tren does an amazing job of fucking with your metabolism and helping you burn more calories,
Yeah.
especially when you're working out and you're eating well. You're gonna shred up on this stuff. Like I've seen people even on like shitty diets take this stuff, and like you see these guys on other forums and stuff, they have pictures of themselves like in their avatars and stuff. Like they have pictures of when they were on Tren, but they don't have pictures of their current physique because when they come off Tren, they can't maintain what they had before. But they get
Yeah.
so shredded on Tren that that's the pictures they want to show off. So at the end of the day, when it comes to Tren, it's gonna help you get to a place where you would have never been able to get to without it. And I know for me personally, it helped me reach all-time personal records in strength and size. And for many of you out there, using it to actually cut down is also
Yes.
going to be very fruitful for you. And one of the things too you want to like be aware of is that the the transformation that you can get on Tren is something that's absurd for the amount of time that you're on it. So,
Oh
8 weeks.
God. Yeah.
Let's say you were doing it for
Yeah.
8 weeks.
Less, Steve. Less.
You can achieve things so quickly on it. So it's kind of a, steroid you got to be careful of because if people at work are gonna like say, "Hey, man, are you on steroids?" Like your friends, your family are gonna accuse you of being on steroids. It's not something that you can kind of keep under the table when you take it because you're gonna transform so quickly on this stuff, and it's gonna change your physique, and it's gonna shred you up, and it's gonna make your muscles cut, and it's gonna get your vascularity insane. That it's just an insane steroid. Hence why competitors are using it. Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, look, one of the things associated with the diet, and we've used this phrase before when we've done similar shows, is nutrient partitioning, which is essentially like making you more efficient or your body more able to use foods, specifically protein, fats, and carbohydrates, in a much more efficient way. Now, of course, because it's so potent, it comes with a side effects. Let me just touch upon one thing, and this is actually I've used, and we're going to talk about Para Pharma options later on. I've used one specific Para Pharma product that contained Tren. I ran it for a brief period, just 4 weeks, Steve, Then I went into my mega bulk. And I've said again and again and again when we've talked about Tren, I literally recompositioned. The idea was that I would do more cardio, I would not eat any crap whatsoever, and I would just go out there and push just as hard as I normally do in the gym. And I dropped down 2 notches on my weight belt. And I think I went from 327 down to 320 at that time and went back up to 327. This is just in a very short period of 4 weeks. And yet my waist stayed down, meaning I lost fat, I lost size off my waist, and then I added muscle because I'd gone back up to the body weight I'd started with. So you go, right, that's real world results. That's not a fucking argument. That was 4 weeks. Now we know why, for example, Steve, is Trenbolone so popular? Of course it's popular. It's one of those because it fucking works. It's like arguing about certain things out in the real world with regard to a phone or a camera or a car or whatever else. Is this the fastest car in the world? Yes. Why? Because it does 330 fucking miles an hour on the high street. There's no argument. You can't go, oh yeah, but the wind was behind it, or it's got this. No, 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 no. That's real world, actual fucking results. You can go down the autobahn and do 250, 300 in that car. Blah, blah, blah. This is not on a track. It's not with a racing driver. That's with you behind the fucking wheel. Trend works like that. The only argument, such as it is almost, I suppose, it's supposed to be the biggest problem that we sometimes have. And it sounds to the listener perhaps like we're salesmen for Tren. And I've got to say, yes, because we've used it. Yes, because it's so fucking effective. But you really, 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 and this is probably the number one thing, don't use it for your first ever steroid, almost because nothing else compares to it. Plus, as we will get into, as Steve said already, the side effects. So we always say to newbies, you really don't want to go with Tren straight out the gate. I know how amazing those people that love Tren feel it working, know it's working. They almost love the sweats. They love the side effects because it's so fucking potent. Let me just touch on that briefly. I'm one of those people who I don't think I'm overly sensitive to testosterone. I could take the same as someone else and they could say it's transformative and they feel great. They feel alpha. They're walking around with a hard on all the time. And I'm like, notice a little bit of effect, but not as much as you. It doesn't feel that potent to me. Tren, even I notice the effects of Tren. Even I go, and the product I was using was quite low milligram of Tren, only amounted to 150 milligrams a week, and even I could feel the effects from it. So some people, they absolutely fucking love it because it's one of those products you can take. It's a bit like taking Clen or DMP, Steve. You know when you're using it. There's no mild anabolic effect. There's no sort of slightly more potent effect like I might have with testosterone. There is an absolute, I know when I'm fucking using it. And for some people, they love that. They love that. It's another argument, Stephen, especially when it comes to cutting. Like Steve said earlier on, you can almost have a poor diet and still get great results. That almost goes, well, then I know that I'm going to get lean if I use Tren. I know I'm going to get results in a way that perhaps other steroids that are useful for cutting don't quite give you that kind of guarantee. So it's that. But of course, the reality is anything that is that effective, anything that is that sexified has to come with kind of side effects. And again, I use this example in previous shows. It's a little bit like putting a fucking turbo into your car and then literally going down to the shops in it and not expecting this car that was only doing 120 miles an hour yesterday that suddenly become capable of doing 160, and you haven't quite driven it slowly just to get used to how much more powerful, how much more potent, how much more of a handful it is. Tren needs to be treated with respect in that particular regards. So when it comes to cutting, when it comes to getting into shape, I've said, as I said earlier on, it's an absolute given that you're going to have that kind of results there. Back to you for a second.
Yeah, and look, the short answer to this question is Tren good for cutting? And look, the short answer is yes. And it's
Yep.
one of the best steroids for that. One of the best steroids.
Mm.
And we typically use steroids, to get bigger and get stronger and prevent muscle wasting and that sort of thing. And a lot of steroids aren't good cutters. Like Dynabol is not a good cutter. Deca is not a good cutter. Anadrol, generally is not a good cutter, although it is a DHT derivative. But Tren, it does it all. It does it all. It can help you get bigger, stronger, and leaner at the same time. And Mobster, he's a perfect example of that. His waist got leaner on Tren, and he changed nothing about his diet, kept training the same way, and it just leaned them out. And it's because of the metabolism
All I
effects.
did, Steve, was cut out. I did, I think, one more dose of cardio. So 6,000, my daily went to 9,000. And I stopped eating sweets and desserts. Everything else stayed exactly the fucking same. Training was the same. Everything else was the same. If
Yeah.
I change a lot, then you got, where's the argument? I only
Yeah.
changed a little bit and I still got great results.
Yeah. And then nobody should be eating sweets and desserts anyway. So if you're eating sweets and desserts, you
Yeah.
shouldn't be using Tren in the first place. So that should have already been. And we're going to talk about diet later in the podcast as well. So look, the bottom line is, we've seen the transformations, but at the end of the day, what Mobster was saying earlier, we're going to get into side effects later. Selling trend. I'm I'm in the middle. Like me, I've used Tren. I used Tren quite a bit back in the day, quite a bit. Maybe use it a
Yep.
little too much. And at one point, I was like, you know what?
You,
I'm done with this stuff.
you got injured. It made you so strong, Steve. You got injured.
Yeah,
It wasn't as
it
worse
worked
in the
against
beginning.
me. It
Yeah.
worked against me. So at the end of the day, like I'm kind of in the middle on it, man. Like I think everyone should try it for sure, but it
At
may
least
not
once.
be
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
everybody. But it's one of those things where the Para Pharma trend, when you do decide to use Para Pharma trend, which if you're a
Yes.
serious bodybuilder, you need to use, if you're a serious bodybuilder, you definitely need to use Tren, and
We're going to give you, we're going to give the listeners tips on mitigating side effects. We're going to make some good suggestions, we think, on how to use it. And, to treat it with respect. That's, I think, the key thing here, Steve. To treat it with respect. Don't use it on every cycle. Make sure you're fully aware of how it works. Make sure that you try it a small amount to begin with just to get the best out of it. Like in Steve's case, and I'll just use Steve as an example here. If he did it again, he would be fully aware this time just how strong it makes him, and he would make sure not to allow himself to get a little bit too carried away and push himself to the point where his muscles, in his case, was a shoulder injury from bench pressing. He wouldn't allow himself to get injured this time around because he knows just how fucking potent Trenbolone is. Let's move on a little bit here, Steve. What we always associate articles with regards to a product like this, specifically Trenbolone in this case, and what came up in the article, and we're going to argue this a little bit ourselves now, we're going to have a back and forth for the benefit of you listening. So in the article, they refer to the initial versions of Trenbolone that were available historically, and that was in the form of Tren acetate, the short ester version. And then over the years, because there was a demand, testosterone enanthate was available. So labs, specifically companies that make products for what the listeners for this show, so we're not talking about medical reasons here, obviously, PED reasons, brought out a Trenbolone enanthate. Now, in the article, it specifically says they thought, the author of the article thought that the ACE version was better for cutting specifically. And I'm like, yeah, if I was writing that article now, Steve, I don't know that I would say that. And the reason I think that is quite simply the popularity of the Trenbolone enanthate. And I know this is actually the article made this point. It says, is it a question of users getting better results, or is it simple? This is the actual phraseology that was used, that the enanthate is more popular versus more effective. Now, what do you think about that, Steve? Which would be better for someone that's cutting? And I will say that the product that I use, which we'll talk about later on in the show, did have the ACE in it. What's your experience and what's your thoughts? Which is better, the long or the shorter ester version
yeah, look,
for cutting?
I believe there's not enough understanding out there from people on what esters are. So esters,
Mm,
they're attached. You have a trend, so you have a trend no ester. That's what we're starting with. So in the
yeah,
lab, they attach the ester to it to give it a slower release. It's like when you go to the drugstore and you
yeah,
get Mucinex. So when you go to the drugstore and you have that Mucinex, it's you have the 24-hour and then you have the 48-hour and you have the 72-hour or whatever. I'm just giving you an example. Why would you get the 72-hour versus the 24-hour? Well, the 24-hour you take it, it's going to be in your system quicker, but it's also going to be out of your system quicker. So if you're looking to sleep in the next day because you're sick, you're gonna wake up in the morning, you're gonna be all stuffed up because the Mucinex is gonna be it'll be out of your system pretty much, right? But if you get the 72-hour version and you're going into the weekend, and you're like, oh, I'm sick, I feel like shit, I just want to fucking sleep in Saturday morning and I want to sleep in Sunday and fucking probably sleep in Saturday afternoon and take a nap Saturday afternoon, right? So you take the fucking 72-hour Mucinex on Friday, you'll be able to sleep in Saturday and even and it's still going to be in your system, right? The whole way. So it's a slower release, but it's not going to be in your system as quick as a 24 hours. So that's the disadvantage. So we're comparing Tren Ace to Tren E, which Para Pharma has both. The Tren Ace is going to be in and out of your system quicker. The Tren E is going to be in your system a little slower and then out of your system a little slower. So really that's all it is. It's just the release of the ester, how fast the hormone is releasing in your body. So a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people don't understand that concept. So they're like, oh, the ACE is better for cutting than the E or whatever. And at the end of the day, it's the same shit. Now, maybe the ACE, because it was in their system quicker and it was peaking quicker, they noticed faster effects of the cutting. So maybe that's why they said that, Mobster. I'm not really sure. But at the end of the day, I've used ACE, I've used E, I've used
Yeah,
blends of Tren. At the end of the day, it's the same fucking shit. It's the same fucking hormone. And it's just about how fast the fucking thing releases. So people they
yeah.
need to stop they have to like take some time to understand how these esters work. And once they do, they'll understand. And a lot of it is a placebo effect because a lot of people parrot that. They're like, oh, the short ester, like a lot of people say with testosterone, the short ester doesn't aromatize, doesn't cause estrogen issues versus the long esters. And other people have said the opposite. Oh, the long ester testosterone doesn't give me estrogen problem, but the short ester does. No, it's just that you've done both and you had different experiences with both. Maybe your body fat was higher or lower. Maybe you had a different diet.
Yes.
Maybe it was just your age. Maybe when you were younger, you were more prone to estrogen, or maybe when you were older, you were more prone to estrogen. So that's not how you do science. That's not how you do
Let me give you an
scientific research.
example, Steve. And actually, Steve makes a great point with regards to the science. And it occurred to me as you were talking, Steve, if it was a popularity contest, as this person suggests, over an effective contest, then at some point the enanthate version would have dropped off the fucking world. People want to get results, and the reality must be that they're not getting slightly slow results or slightly less better results or whatever else. They're getting the same fucking results because if they didn't, why the fuck's it still selling? This isn't like a book that some of us like to read, and others don't. The books I've got a couple of books here, Steve. They're fucking awful, awful, and yet they're considered classics. They're so goddamn hard to read. It's unreal. So you wouldn't bother with it. So therefore, I've got no idea what happens because it's so fucking god awful to read. But here we're talking about a medication. Does it work or doesn't it? And the reality is, it must fucking work. It's not. We're not buying it because we like the name or a lovely name, Fate. It's my favourite word. No, we're buying it because there are results. So the person that wrote that article, they've got plenty of good information in there. But the one thing I'm going to say is, does enanthate the longer ester work? Yes. And again, like Steve said, there's always going to be variables in regards to people's condition or whatever else. For example, this is we'll touch upon because we're going to talk about diet and training next. If you want to get the best results from something, make sure that you're controlling some of the variables. So, for example, make sure that your diet is on point, make sure your training's on point. And you do this because if you're so, as Steve said earlier on, with regards to the poor diets are still getting results, if your diet is good, you'll get better results. And to put it crudely, and this will apply unfortunately to some of our listeners, if you're a fat motherfucker, you're going to get good results. But if you'd allowed yourself to get lean, or you fix your diet, or your cardio was on point and your training was on point, guess what? You're going to get even better results. And real world examples of this, which I've used on previous shows, is thus. I come from the world of strength, hence the desserts and the sweets that we mentioned earlier on. I don't need to be as focused on training, etc., or diet, should I say, as perhaps a bodybuilder who's looking to look absolutely lean and amazing on stage. That means I've hung around with weightlifters and specifically people that compete in strongman competitions. And even though they are leaner now than they was in the past, they will still have a higher percentage of body fat than a competing bodybuilder or someone who genuinely wants a six pack or an eight pack. It's not important for strongmen, and strongmen will use Tren, and therefore the effects, the side effects, the results will differ from bodybuilders, and there's a reason for the training and the diet specifically. The sheer volume of calories that some of the strongmen eat, the lack of a need to be leaner, although historically they are relatively lean compared to what they used to be, and so on. So look, we are going to recommend, and I'm going to bring Steve back in for this, and more because Steve is a leaner individual than I am anyway, and that's more of his thing than it is my thing. You need to cut. I would argue, Steve, you actually kind of almost need to do what I call a pre-diet. Don't just wait until you're on trend. Look at what the fuck you're eating right now and start to clean that up. Start to fucking fix it. Start to do meal prep. If you wasn't already, you should start doing those things. Get that under your belt, so to speak, for a few weeks, and then introduce the stacks, which we're going to talk about. Then introduce specifically, in this case, the trend. Now, your training should be on point anyway. Don't be one of those people that waits till they're on a PD stack to get everything perfect. Have it perfect. This is how you retain muscle. This is how you look good. But then we're going to bring in trend to give you the best fucking results. So you must clean up your diet. You must make sure that every single day you're getting your cardio in. You must make sure that you're getting the absolute best out of your training. And then when you introduce trend and anything that we ask you to suggest that you stack with it, you will get the best results. What do you think on that, Steve, before we move on?
Yeah, and look, at the end of the day, in my experience, using both ACE and E, they both are going to hit you like an absolute ton of bricks. So at the end of the day, make a decision. Do you want something that's going to be in your system quicker? Or do you want something that's going to linger like Tren E when you come off? So they both hit you like a ton of bricks. Then when you stop taking it, the E will linger longer. And so if you're really annoyed with side effects from Tren, which we're going to get into later, the ACE might come in handy for you. And if you don't mind injecting more frequently, ACE will be fine for you. If it's your first cycle or two, I always recommend that you go with ACE because you can keep the cycle shorter and you'll get a good taste of what Tren is all about in 5 or 6 weeks on it. And then you can come off and you won't, cause so much damage in your body like you would by going with a longer cycle of 10 or 12 weeks. So at the end of the day, those would be the decisions you have to make. How long are you going to run the cycle? Do you want it in and out of your system quicker? It's going to be in your system almost in the same amount. And look, the reason for that is because Tren is so fucking strong. It's so fucking strong. So it's going to hit you like a ton of bricks in either situation. And then when you stop taking it, the E will linger a little longer. So you got to make the decision on what you want to do. So I'd recommend, if it's your first time using Tren, to go with ACE. I strongly, strongly recommend that because if you do end up with issues with side effects, you'll be able to stop it. You'll be able to come off. And you may get sick of it when you're on it. When you may end up getting sick of it, and you like, I don't want this shit in my system anymore. I'm having too much issues, and I just want it out of my system. But if you're on E and you stop taking it, it may take 2-3 weeks for the side effects to die down. But with ACE, it'll take about a week and a half. Go ahead, Monster. Anything on that? And we'll go
I've
into
got to
Trent
say that I
also.
agree. I've got to say that I agree with that, Steve. But again, to move on, what do you think about getting the best results in terms of diet and training versus, as you said earlier on, the people that are a little bit lazy sometimes with regards to not eating as clean as they should and not necessarily getting the best results? Before we talk about the options and benefits.
Yeah. You want to jump into that?
Yeah, I covered it already, buddy. I'm just bringing you back in for your opinion on that.
Yeah, at the end of the day, buddy, it's like I said, look, at the end of the day with Trent, here's the bottom line. If you ask 100 people who use Tren, you're going to get 100 different answers. So at the end of the day, you've got to try it for yourself. And as I said, don't use Tren as a first cycle. Don't use Tren as a second cycle. Wait till your fifth or sixth cycle at least before you use it. And then you can make your own decisions on that. But look, every Tren cycle I've done has been different. Every single one. I've had different experiences on ACE. I've had different experiences on E. I had different experiences with the blends, et cetera, et cetera. So at the end of the day, it's really going to boil down to your own personal experiences. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Mobster. Yep. Go ahead, Mobster. Make sure you unmute.
Yeah, sorry guys. I've got the list here of the Para Pharma options, and me and Steve are going to have a little bit of a conversation now about which we would use and how we would use them. So I'll read these out, Steve. They do an oral version, 250 micrograms. They do the Cut Stack 150, which is specifically the product I've used myself, and I've mentioned that my experiences earlier on, which consists of 50 milligrams trenpropionate, 50 milligrams tren acetate, and 50 milligrams of mastron propionate per milliliter. They do a Trenbo Ace, which is 100 milligrams a milliliter. They do something called Long Stack 300, which is mastron enanthate at 100 milligrams, Trenbolone enanthate at 100 milligrams, and testosterone enanthate at 100 milligrams. They do a further product, which is slightly more potent, slightly different ratio here. Tren Mix 350, which is Trenbolone enanthate at 100 milligrams and testosterone enanthate at 250 milligrams. And then to finish, they do something called Trenbo E200, which, as you can guess now, of course, guys, is Trenbolone enanthate at 200 milligrams a milliliter. Of these, as I said earlier on, I've used the Cut Stack 150. The oral Tren, can't say that I know anybody typically,
Yeah.
Steve, when we talk about these kind of things on the forum is used.
Yeah.
Are you aware of
I would,
anybody
I would,
on the
I would,
oral?
yeah, my view on this is unless you simply are paranoid or you have some type of phobia from needles and you can never use needles or your wife doesn't let you have needles around the house because you have kids or whatever, that would be the only time I would mess with oral Tren because the injectable is going to be far, far more superior. In fact, the oral Tren, the way the structure is of the oral Tren is completely different than the way the injectable Tren is, where it's not even the same thing. So I would say the oral Tren is not even worth it, in my opinion. Side effects versus you're going to get side effects on injectable Tren, but it's going to be well worth it. You see what I'm saying? The oral Tren, it's just not going to be worth it. So the only time you should mess with the oral Tren, I think, is if you have like a huge phobia of needles or you just can't have needles at all. So it might be something for you to try, but the injectable is going to be far superior in my opinion. But Para Pharma has the oral Tren if you do want to try it.
Yeah, yeah. Of these, Steve, I think the Trenbo Ace 100 or the Trenbo A100 specifically would be an ideal first-time choice. As Steve said earlier on, if you've never used Trenbolone at all and you're thinking about using Tren for a cutting stack, as we discussed today, this would be my first-time choice for a user, purely and simply for how do I manage Trenbolone? How do I process it? Am I going to struggle with the side effects? Could I have made things slightly differently? And then it gives you more of a quicker get out, so to speak. So that would be my first choice. Now, my personal experience, as I said, is the Cut Stack 150. Now, looking at the options they've got available, I think the Long Stack 300 or more of the Cut Stack 150 would be my argument for popularity. If you was going to run a product solo, then I would probably look at the Trenbo E200, the enanthate, purely and simply because you know that you're going to get on with it, you're well aware of the side effects, you know the results you're going to get, and you've decided to go solo for a decent length of time. Let me have a quick look here, Steve, and this is just a question of stacking products together and so on and so forth. With the Cut Stack 150, the product's already stacked. And I know people, for example, I ran that, which was 3 pins a week. So I was getting 450 milligrams total for the results that we touched upon earlier on. What about your experience, Stephen? What would you stack with any of these products so that we can talk about that as well?
So first of all, the cut stack 150, that's going to be the most popular option for those of you who are competing or just want to shred up ahead of a show or ahead of a vacation or ahead of photos or something, because that mastering addition to it is going to harden you up and increase your vascularity to an amazing level. So it's really going to work great for you if you want to go that route. Another option too with the long stack 300 is for those of you who want to run maybe a longer cycle. So with the cut stack 150, you want to run it like 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks would be good on it. And then the long stack 300, you want to run it at least 8 weeks, maybe 8, 10 weeks, because that has a longer ester. So that would be something for you who have more experience. So that would be the two best options in my opinion to cut down. You should be able to cut down beautifully on a slack like that. Those of you who really react well to testosterone out there and you're able to cut down on testosterone well, which some of you will, some of you won't. The Tren Mix 350, as you mentioned, Mobster, could be a good one for you because it is the Tren and testosterone mix. But a lot of you out
Yes.
there would I know for me, it would be more of a bulking and strength blend than it would be a cutting brand. But like I said, there is a percentage of you out there, maybe 20, 30%, maybe 35%, who do cut really well on testosterone. Why? Because everybody's different, like we said. So that would be the options, and of course, just if you don't want to use a blend at all, you could just go with the Trembo Ace 100 or the Trembo E200, which is the Tren E, and just run Tren. Now, other options from Para Pharma that you can stack here:
Yeah.
Anavar. I know you're a big fan of Anavar. Maybe touch upon Anavar after this mobster, but T-Bol is a good one. I've done T-Bol with Trend many times, and T-Bol is kind of like the baby sister or the baby brother of Anavar. And I like T-Bol a lot because it helps. It seems to be really good for endurance, and it doesn't cause a lot of pumps like Anavar will. So for me, if I want to do like a lot of cardio on the cycle, and Tren is going to mess up your cardio, so it's like T-Bol can kind of offset it. Another one that can offset cardio too, Mobster, is Equipoise. So Equipoise might be a good option with Tren, and I've done that before because the Tren's going to ruin your cardio and the Equipoise is going to help your cardio. Equipoise is one of the best ones for those of you who want to do endurance or cardio. So if you want to cut on your cycle and you want to do a lot more cardio like you were doing, Monster, you want to increase your cardio, but Trend's going to wreck your cardio, then T-Bol or Equipoise would be a good option. What do you think about those, and what do you think about Anavar?
Yeah, I made a list as Steve was talking, and I absolutely agree with Steve's comments on the T-Bowl. We've actually mentioned this a few times, Steve, because as Steve's touched upon, the effects on your cardio, it just makes it that much more difficult for you to get your steps in or hit the treadmill or hit the stairmaster, and you're going to be sweating like a motherfucker. So you have the two options here, and of the two options, T-Bowl would be the one. It was deliberately designed to enable people to not be the giants swollen the fuck up, etc., that it was back in the Olympics, and still have that athleticism, still be functional in the way that they trained for in order to peak for competition. Meaning, in our case, as we're cutting, that you're still going to have the energy, the ability, maybe not as much with the Tren as without, but certainly in a way that makes it more manageable and more capable. You still need to plug away, guys. EQ would be the next one after that, followed, I think, by Winstrol. EQ again, because it's going to give you some athletic ability, some ability to do cardio, just not as potently as T-Bowl on a milligram for milligram basis. And then finally, and if there's an issue here, Steve, and again, this will completely depend on your condition when you started and how your condition improved as you went along, the Winstrol. And the only issue there is the drying out issue. You don't forget again, guys, sweating on train, trying to get the cardio in, and you're going to add the potential if you get really lean or really dry for that sort of drying out issue that some people struggle with. I'm going to touch upon briefly the VAR. And I could be Steve, I'll move away briefly from cutting because for me, I've found VAR, especially so in the past, incredibly useful for me to peak for my strength. And the idea of using a shorter rest advised version of Tren to maintain strength or increase strength, and then a small 30 to 50 milligrams a day for a short period of time, say 4 to 6 weeks at the end of a strength cycle, and bring in VAR. The only issue there is going to be the shin pumps, the muscle pumps that some people struggle with. But in terms of me peaking my strength, that would be ideal. And again, guys, you might want to hold on to touch your strength while you're cutting as well. So look at that thing. Let me mitigate some of the side effects here, Steve. Managing issues with Tren. Right. So I've touched upon this already. Number one, be in some kind of condition when you start. Don't be 300 pounds and 40% body fat and think you're going to get away with no side effects, because the doses would need to be minimal. If you use typical doses, the leaner you are, the better you are. That also applies to conditioning. And again, you're going to want a level of conditioning anyway, as well as still being able to get your steps in, do your cardio, hit the stairmaster, ride the bike, hit the rower, so on and so forth. So don't start from a bad place. Start from a good place to get better results. Steve and I are both familiar, both through our personal experiences and looking at the experiences of many, many thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of users. Diet, diet, and more diet. The guys, the ladies, if on the handful that we know about that use Tren, get the best results if their diet is on fucking point. And arguably, Steve, you can actually include this in the diet. One of the things I know Steve's recommended before, and this especially applies to as we do this show, we're getting towards the summer, so mid-spring, we talk about hydrating fruits. So, for example, make sure to mitigate side effects, you stay hydrated. One of the things I do now, Steve, and that's just at this time of year, maybe a sign of my age as well, is I have a bottle of dilute squash by the side of my bed. If I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm dry, I will have a mouthful and then go back to sleep, just to stop my mouth drying out. On Tren, I think that would be a given. We have seen experiences with users where they absolutely must consume, and it depends where you live in the world and just how hot it is, liters, pints. I think the typical, and you'd be able to say something about this, Steve, 8 or 9 pints, a gallon of water per day. And at certain places and certain places in the world, more. You do not want to get dehydrated. One of the issues is, again, with mitigation, for example, I think you've touched upon this in the past, and it sounds like a silly thing to say, having a fucking fan in your bedroom. People will talk about, again, with the side effects, the Tren sweats that Steve talked about.
Yep. Yeah, we're gonna get into
If they
that.
shit.
Yeah. But I
Yeah,
want to
go
touch
on. Yeah,
upon,
talk about it. Yeah.
I don't mean to interrupt you. I want to touch upon the diet because you brought up a good point about the fruits.
Yeah,
And one of,
talk about the diet,
yeah,
especially your personal experience as well, Steve. Yeah.
yeah, and one of the tricks that I did is I would go to the grocery store, go to the produce section, and I pick up some good organic melons. Okay, a lot of times they have sales, whatever is in season. A lot of people here where I am in North America, I don't know if it's the same way with you, Britain. I think it is in the northern hemisphere. Melons, watermelon especially, is in season during the summer. And then if you're in the southern hemisphere, our friends in Australia, New Zealand, it's the opposite. I believe your season would be the other time of the year, which would be your summer and our winter. So that's a great option, but also cantaloupe, honeydew, a lot of these melons, what I do, whatever is in season, whatever looks good. A lot of times the grocery stores, what they'll do, at least where I shop, is they'll cut it in half, right? They'll cut it in half. This way you could see the inside. Because the problem with melon is that you buy melon, you don't know, you're going to open it up, it could be rotten, you know? So I like the grocery stores that cut it in half, and this way you can actually see what's inside. So I'll get that, even if though it's a little more expensive to get that because they're basically charging you for cutting it in half. But at least this way you don't get home, open it up, and it's no good on the inside. Pineapple, tropical fruits are really good. Pineapple is great on Tren because pineapple has bromelain in it, and papaya does as well. And what this compound does is it helps with your digestion. So you can basically, after every single meal, you can have a little pineapple or have a little papaya. And that will also help you hydrate. It's going to have a lot of electrolytes. It's going to have a lot of vitamins and minerals. So, and that's going to help when you're on Tren because on Tren, you can't drink enough when you're on Tren, especially if you live in a warmer climate. It just seems like when you're on Tren, no matter how much you drink, it's never enough. And so eating foods like fruit that have a high water content, which fruit does, and has a lot of electrolytes, raw coconut water. I would load up on that, some really cold raw coconut water. Make sure you read the ingredients, guys. A lot of these coconut waters, you go to the grocery store, you look at the ingredients, they add sugar, they add preservatives. No, 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 no. Get the raw, pay a little more money to go to the health food store and get the raw coconut water. It's expensive. I know it's expensive, but trust me, it's well worth it. And have just always be drinking water, guys. Like as soon as you get up in the morning, drink, drink, drink. Before you go to bed, drink, drink, drink. You're gonna get up at night to pee, drink, drink, drink. You know, because on Tren, I'm a big believer in not getting up at night to drink because we don't need water. But on Tren, you need water. On Tren, you need water. If you don't drink water on Tren, you're gonna get yourself into trouble. So it's very, very important. And you got to eat a clean diet on Tren. Don't eat shit that's gonna upset your stomach on Tren. You need to know what foods you're intolerant to and what's you're not. Like if you can't have dairy without getting nauseous because you're lactose intolerant, then why the fuck would you have dairy on Tren? Because Tren itself is going to make you nauseous. Now you're eating something that makes you nauseous. So diet is crucial on Tren. It's about avoiding things that will mess up with your stomach. And that's what you want to avoid. Don't go eat restaurant foods which are full of oils and garbage in it because that's going to mess up your stomach, especially on Tren. So you don't want anything to interfere with your Tren cycle. You want to have a really, really good diet on Tren, eat whole foods. You want to be food prepping. You want to do all that stuff if you want the most success out of Tren. And as Mobster said earlier, you've got to cut out the junk and cut out the sweets when you're when you're on Tren. If you want to cut and you want to have the best results, you've got to food prep. You got to eat clean foods. You got to load up on carbs on Tren. If you're not a carb person, then Tren is probably not a good idea for you. The good carbs, the sweet potatoes, the rice, the brown rice especially, rice pasta, as long as you're okay digesting it, or vegetable pasta, something like that. A lot of good carbs. Like I said, a lot of fruits, lots of vegetables. Those are good carbs. You want to stick to the good carbs, and the good carbs are going to help feed your body when you're on Tren, and they're going to be beneficial while you're on Tren, and you're still going to be able to cut. Don't be like, oh my God, I can't have carbs because I'm not going to be able to cut on carbs. Bullshit. All right. Bullshit. We got on the forum people doing logs who are eating 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs and they're shredding up. Why is that? Because carbs aren't your enemy. You've got to stick to the clean carbs. So find clean carbs while you're on Tren. That's going to be very, very important as far as your diet. Mobster, you touch on diet a little bit, or definitely talk about training because you're the training guru.
Yeah, you just mentioned something there, Steve, and I'm thinking of one example just off the top of my head, who's one of our regular buddies. We've even had him on as a guest, and I believe at one point he was hitting 500 600 grams a day of carbs. And he's still in condition now, even as we're doing this show, and I don't think he's on Trend. I was going to ask you a question. This relates actually to the length of cycles. So we talked about products that we might stack with it, and again, Para Pharma has all of those products. We've touched upon side effects. I will mention training in a moment. So the length, I've seen, and this is just for cycle lengths again. Steve mentioned earlier on with regards to the ACE 8 weeks and the Enanthate 10 to 12 weeks. I've got to say that I agree with Steve on those. First time experience ACE for a short period of time just to see how you manage guys and then stretching out to 8 weeks, 10 weeks. As Steve said, more experience using Enanthate, stretching it out to 12 weeks. I have seen examples, and I got to say that I've said for the most part, no, where people will be talking about Trend for 16 to 20 weeks. I'm going to say no, purely simply because most people that would be horrendous experience in terms of the side effects, and probably because Steve touched upon this on other shows we've done when he talks about all steroids are kind of inflammatory, so foods are inflammatory, and the problem, and this is the reason for the side effects with Tren, is the inflammatory response of Tren on the body. So the idea that you would be stressing your body above and beyond what you need to, i.e. cutting, muscle building, strength building, doesn't make sense to me that you want to stress your body any more than you need to. Oh, something else, Steve, just to finish on that thought, make sure that you're using an organ protector on cycle for those same reasons. And when Steve was talking about it, or just to finish, because of the sweating, you're probably going to be sweating out some of your electrolytes. So that's another advantage of the fresh fruits and the hydrating fruits that Steve talked about. Training. Look, guys, if we include the idea of the trend side effects and the food partition that we talked about earlier on, and especially when it comes to cardio, it can be difficult, and especially for the inexperienced user. But this is one of those situations. You've made the choice to use Tren. You know that Tren works. You know that Tren's effective. And because you've listened to the show, you're well aware of the side effects. So it comes down to this. As I said earlier on, preparatory cardio, preparatory training, your diet's on point, then you start the Tren. And because you're aware of the potential issues and side effects, but also the great results, do your fucking damnedest to make sure that this is the time when you grind. Imagine it thus, and we touched upon this earlier on, Steve. It's a kind of difference between being 100% focused and half-assed. Half-assed with Tren, you're still going to see something. You're still going to see something like a result, a positive result. But if you can grind in the gym, if you can get in there, I think this is what I would do, Steve. I would absolutely go to the gym with a plan. I'd work exactly on those muscles that I need to work on. The majority of our listeners are going to be bodybuilders or people looking to cut. I would do, if I was cutting, I would do my cardio first. This is just so you know that you've done the conditioning work, you know that you've been burning calories. I would probably try to do that in the earlier part of the day when it's cooler. So there's a couple of tips right there. In terms of training, hit it hard, keep it brief. And again, this is because of some of the side effects, the sweats, etc., etc. I wouldn't want to do a 2-hour workout, Steve, smashing a granny out of shit and be sweating like a motherfucker and coughing and God knows what else. So get it in, get it focused, moderate to heavy weights for you bodybuilders. Just be squeezing on the contraction and think. This is probably a little bit of a tip again. Every single thing that you do, whether it's with a knife and fork or barbell or a dumbbell in the gym or on the treadmill, think cut. Everything you're doing is about getting you into shape. That's the reason you made the choice. And that's the reason why you're there. We should probably do this kind of thing all the time, Steve. But I think in this example, it's especially important to do exactly that kind of stuff and get it fucking on point. I want to touch upon, and this is as we get towards the end of the show here, Steve, and we've done this, and I'll bring my experience back into this. We always like to talk about why we talk about certain companies, and today's company, of course, is Para Pharma. So you go number one, as we've done on other shows, have we used Para Pharma product? Yes. I specifically mentioned that I'd used the Cut Stack 150 and the results that I got. This isn't me talking out of my arse. I'm not making up shit as I go along. I literally have personal experience of using Para Pharma products. We talk about, as we've done on many, many shows, how a company like Para Pharma comes to be discussed on the shows. Well, that's because it's a good, solid company producing products that fucking work. We know that, again, for the same reasons I've stated on other shows, because we can prove for ourselves, just me and Steve as we do this show, but also hundreds of users on Evolutionary, and I mean hundreds. You come on the forums, you click, you put Para Pharma into the search, and see the number of threads where people are using Para Pharma in their logs. You then go into those logs, see the food that those guys have eaten, see them. As Steve just said, as we do this show, it's early spring for me here in the UK, but it's been 40 fucking degrees in Australia in the last couple of weeks. I believe you've had a cyclone in Australia recently. You've got the weather in the US has gone from New York freezing cold to down where Steve lives in Florida, much, much warmer. So the ability to train certain weathers and temperatures, etc., makes a lot of sense in that particular regard. So again, you can look on these logs and see people that are training in different places, in different temperatures, and still getting great results. And you see great results from the guys that food prep. You see great results from the guys that put these things up. But more specifically here, you can literally put Para Pharma and see the logs where people are running their products. I can't think of a single example, Steve, as we do this show, of one person who's logging and using Para Pharma that's had any problems. None. They might have had to wait for a product to turn up. That's probably as bad as it's got. Talk about the success of users using Para Pharma, Steve, in that particular example. Can you think of a single person that's had a problem with Para Pharma?
No, I have not. And another thing that Para Pharma does really well is that they provide a lot of good sales. Seems like month after month, they're posting on the forums. They're saying, there's a sale for this month, there's a sale for that. There's a deal on this. There's the freebies. If you buy this much, stuff, you get, free this, free that. So they're always trying their best. I mean, in these economic times to make sure that their customers have something, something extra that they can provide. So the nice thing about them, they've been around a long time. I think 15 years now, Mobster. So at the end of the day, they've been around a long time. Their products have been around a long time, and they're tested and they're very well priced, and that's important to a lot of people. They also have excellent customer service, and they have excellent shipping. So you can come on the forum and you can find out where to get Para Pharma. They are definitely a top tier source. And when it comes to Tren, a good quality source can make a lot of difference. Over the years, I've
Yes.
seen a lot of Tren being manufactured in bathtubs because it's one of the easiest ones to manufacture and one of the cheapest ones to manufacture. So you see a lot of cheap Tren out there, bathtub gear, I call it. And what happens is people use that stuff and it's overdosed, it's underdosed, it's low quality, it's got a lot of crap in it, a lot of chemicals, a lot of um, things in it, metals that don't belong in our
Yes.
body. You're injecting that shit. No, 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 no. You want to make sure you use a high quality brand like Para Pharma when you're using Tren because you want a good pure product, and you'll notice you get less problems on Para Pharma Tren than you would on that bathtub gear that you're getting from the guy in the white van behind the gym. Mobster, finish up with Para
Wow.
Pharma thoughts.
I was just going to finish on that thought, Steve, thinking the days of the cattle pellets and the Phenoplex and having to break it down with fucking DMSO and acetone and rub it on your skin and shit. Those days are long gone, guys. Absolutely long gone. And you've got more Trenbolone options than you've had before. It used to be literally, as we said earlier on, Trebolone Ace only. So you want to make sure, as Steve said, use a solid source like Para Pharma to source your Trebolone. When they've done the work for you, put it together different products so you absolutely can make the right choice for you. You can use the information in this podcast to make sure that whether you're going to use acetate or enanthate, and you listen to this show again just to say, what can I do to get the best from my diet, from my conditioning, from my training, and so on and so forth. And then absolutely go to Para Pharma, look at the product options, pick what's the best for you, and know just because you've literally, users like to say, I've done my research and I've made sure that Para Pharma is a solid brand, producing solid products and putting out getting people great results, because that is ultimately what we're talking about here. Can you cut using Trenbolone from Para Pharma? Yes, you can, I think, as the song goes. There you go, guys. Thank you very much for listening. As always, please note we are not doctors and the opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. A podcast for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.